Children, today's topic is coordination. In coordination, today we will be doing reflex action. So first of all, what is the definition of reflex action? Reflex action may be defined as action done without the will of the animal. Action done without the will of the animal. Okay, now, for example, sneezing, coughing, blinking of the eyes, and these are all example of reflex action. Another example is withdrawal of hand. A very good example is withdrawal of hand. When touching a hot object. Withdrawal of hand when touching a hot object. This is a very good example. Now, what is the process? How does it occur? First of all, when your hand touches the hot object, the sensory neuron the sensory neurons receives the impulse and is carried to the spinal cord, carried toward the spinal cord along the dorsal root. Along the dorsal root. The dorsal root is part of the linking pathway. It is the linking pathway between the outside stimuli and the spinal nerve. Second point, impulse arrive at the nerve ending Impulse arrive at the nerve ending of the sensory neuron. In the spinal cord. The nerve ending releases a chemical which diffuses across the cap and it is the nerve ending releases a chemical which diffuses across gap and is carried to the relay neuron. And it is carried to the relay neuron the chemical stimulates the relay neuron to produce an impulse. To produce an impulse. To produce an impulse. To produce an impulse. Another synapses link the relay neuron to the another synapses links another synapses links the relay neuron with the motor neuron. Another synapse link the relay neuron with the motor neuron to this relay neuron is linked with another neuron via the synapses, and that is called motor neuron. The motor neuron carries the impulse. The impulse, travels along the motor neuron. The impulse travels along the motor neuron away from the spinal cord. Away from the spinal cord along the ventral root. Along the ventral root. The ventral root is a part of the linking path. The ventral root is part of the linking pathway. The ventral root is part of the linking pathway. The ventral root is part of the linking pathway between the spinal nerve and the effector. Between the spinal nerve and effector. Okay. Number 6. Now the effector neuron are connected to the bicep muscles. The effector neurons are connected to the bicep muscles. A response is produced. And the bicep muscle contracts. Yeah. Withdrawing. And the response is produced and the bicep contract, which causes withdrawal of hand. Okay, now children, these are the 6 steps which you must be remembering. The first step was, I just told you, that as your hand touches the hot object, sensory neuron carries the impulse The sensory neuron carries the impulse to the impulse is generated, which carries the impulse to the spinal cord. And as the impulse carried to the spinal cord, what happens? It passes through the synapses. A chemical is released. And as what happens, the chemical stimulates, this chemical is released, which passes through the synapses to the relay neuron. Now, in the relay neuron, what happens? This chemical stimulates the relay neuron to produce an impulse. And so this relay neurons are connected to the another neuron, that is the motor neuron. So what happens? That impulse travels along the motor neuron, away from the spinal cord, along the ventral root. And ventral root is the path of the linking pathway between the spinal nerve and effectors. So what happens? The effector neurons are connected to the bicep muscles. And as the response is produced, the bicep muscle contract, and as a result of that, withdrawal of the hand take place. So this was all about the reflex action. Reflex action, you see that reflex action is an involuntary action. And I gave you example: coughing, sneezing, blinking of the eyes. So a question might come in the exam, and they give a figure, or there will be a photograph showing that the hand is touching a hot object. Then the examiner will ask what will happen and how is the reflex action carried. That you have to explain, or they will say that in this diagram, point out or arrow how the impulse is carried. So you have to make the arrow, and then the next is that how the response is completed. So you read this question clearly, keep the diagram in front of you, and study it step by step. Each and everything will be clear for you. Thank you.